The temperature outside had dropped to minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and the entire neighborhood was buried under thick winter snow. But inside Daniel Harper's home, something felt even colder than the weather, because his heat had just been shut off. Daniel stood in the middle of his living room, staring at the thermostat in disbelief. The screen was blank. The vents were silent. And the air inside his house felt like stepping into an empty freezer. At first, he assumed it was a technical problem. Maybe the furnace had failed. Maybe a power line was frozen, but then he checked his phone, and that's when he saw the email. It came from the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. The message was short, cold, and strangely formal. Due to non-compliance with HOA community standards, heating access to your unit has been temporarily suspended. Daniel read the sentence again, heating suspended. In the middle of a brutal winter storm, his hands tightened around the phone as confusion slowly turned into disbelief. He had lived in the community for 3 years and had never missed a payment, so what rule could possibly justify shutting off someone's heat during dangerous weather? The email ended with a final line that made his stomach drop. If the violation is not resolved, further penalties may follow. Daniel looked around his freezing house and realized something unsettling. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Someone on the HOA board had decided to make an example out of him, and they had chosen the coldest night of the year to do it. But what they didn't know yet was that Daniel wasn't the kind of person who stayed silent. The next morning, Daniel woke up wearing 2 jackets and wrapped in blankets. Ice had formed on the inside corners of the windows, and every breath in the house looked like fog. The temperature inside had dropped dangerously low overnight. Daniel grabbed his phone and immediately called the HOA management office. After 3 attempts, someone finally answered. Maple Ridge Community Office, a calm voice said. Daniel tried to stay polite. My heat was shut off last night. The temperature is minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit. There has to be some mistake. There was a pause, then the woman replied, your property has an active violation notice. What violation? Daniel asked. Unapproved exterior decorations. Daniel blinked. Decorations? Yes, she continued calmly. Your holiday lights were not removed by the deadline stated in our community guidelines. Daniel almost laughed in disbelief. You shut off my heating system because of Christmas lights? The board approved enforcement measures, the voice answered. Daniel felt a strange mix of anger and disbelief rising inside him. The rule itself seemed ridiculous. But the punishment felt even worse. Turning off someone's heat in extreme winter temperatures wasn't just harsh, it felt dangerous. And suddenly Daniel realized something important. If the HOA board believed they could treat homeowners like this, then they probably had no idea what kind of legal trouble they were walking into. By afternoon, Daniel was sitting at his kitchen table with a laptop, gloves still on his hands as he searched through state housing laws. What he found made his eyes widen. In many states, removing heat during extreme winter conditions could violate basic housing protections. Even landlord-tenant laws often required heating to remain active for safety reasons, and while HOAs had authority over community rules, they didn't have unlimited power. Daniel scrolled deeper into legal documents, reading every detail carefully. That's when something caught his attention. The heating system in Maple Ridge wasn't privately owned, it was part of the community-controlled heating infrastructure managed by the HOA itself, which meant the board had deliberately ordered the shutdown, not for safety, not for maintenance, but as punishment. Daniel leaned back slowly, realizing just how serious the decision was, because if the HOA had crossed legal boundaries, this wasn't just a dispute anymore, it could become a lawsuit. Later that evening, Daniel documented everything, screenshots of emails, temperature readings, photos of the frozen thermostat, and before going to bed, he made one final phone call, this time, not to the HOA, but to a lawyer, because if the HOA board wanted to play games in freezing weather, Daniel was about to bring them into a courtroom where the rules were very different. 2 days later, Daniel sat across from attorney Laura Mitchell in a warm office downtown. She read the HOA email carefully, then looked up slowly. They shut off your heat because of holiday lights? Daniel nodded. Laura leaned back in her chair, clearly surprised. Did they give written notice before taking that action? Yes, Daniel said, sliding another document across the desk. She scanned the paper and shook her head. This is unusual. Daniel felt a small wave of relief. So it's illegal? Laura chose her words carefully. HOAs do have enforcement authority, she said. But cutting off essential utilities during dangerous weather can cross into serious legal territory. Daniel watched as she opened another document on her computer. In fact, she continued, if the board knowingly created unsafe living conditions, they could face liability. Daniel blinked. Liability? Laura nodded. For negligence. Or even abuse of authority. Daniel had expected the HOA to receive a warning, but what Laura said next surprised him even more. If we file this case properly, she explained, the court could investigate the entire HOA board. Suddenly, this wasn't just about restoring his heat, it was about exposing how the board had been running the community, and Daniel had a feeling that once the investigation started, the story of Maple Ridge HOA might become much bigger than anyone expected. News travels quickly in a neighborhood. Within a week, word had spread that Daniel had filed legal action against the HOA board. At first, some neighbors were skeptical. HOA disputes happened all the time. Most ended quietly, but then something unexpected happened. People started knocking on Daniel's door. One neighbor explained how the HOA had issued hundreds of dollars in fines for minor landscaping differences. Another described repeated threats for parking slightly outside painted lines. A retired couple shared letters warning them about mailbox colors. The more Daniel listened, the clearer the pattern became. Many homeowners had quietly experienced the same thing: strict rules, harsh enforcement, and a board that rarely explained its decisions. But until now, no one had challenged them. Daniel's case was the first time someone had taken the issue beyond the neighborhood. Soon the story reached local media. A reporter published a small article about a homeowner whose heat had been turned off during sub-zero weather, and suddenly the situation gained attention far beyond Maple Ridge. Because the question people kept asking was simple: why would an HOA board go that far? Just to enforce a rule about decorations? When the court hearing finally arrived, the Maple Ridge HOA board sat quietly on one side of the room. Daniel and his attorney sat on the other. Laura presented the evidence carefully: the email ordering the heating shutdown, weather reports confirming the -15 degrees Fahrenheit temperature, and testimony from neighbors about the board's strict enforcement methods. The judge listened closely. Then he asked a simple question: did the HOA board knowingly approve the heating suspension? After a long silence, the board president admitted they had voted on the action. The courtroom became very quiet. The judge's expression changed slightly as he reviewed the documents again. He explained that while HOAs could enforce community standards, essential living conditions required responsible decisions. Actions that placed residents in unsafe situations could not be justified by simple rule violations. By the end of the hearing, the judge ordered immediate restoration of Daniel's heating service, but the decision didn't stop there. He also requested a formal review of the HOA board's authority and conduct, and for the first time since the conflict began, the people who once controlled the neighborhood suddenly looked very uncertain about their own future. Over the following months, the investigation into the Maple Ridge HOA board revealed several serious management problems. Important decisions had been made without proper oversight, penalties had been applied inconsistently, and enforcement actions had often ignored reasonable safety considerations. Eventually, the community voted to remove the entire board and elect new leadership. For many homeowners, it felt like a fresh start. The rules remained in place, but the atmosphere in the neighborhood changed. Communication improved, penalties became fair and transparent, and most importantly, residents felt heard again. One winter evening, Daniel stood near his living room window watching snow fall gently across the street. This time, his house was warm. The vents hummed quietly, filling the room with comfortable heat. What had started as a freezing night and a shocking email had turned into something much bigger. It reminded everyone in the neighborhood that rules should protect communities, not create fear, and sometimes, it only takes one person willing to stand up and ask the right questions to change everything. And that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you love the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.